Hi, my name is Marcus, and this is a companion podcast for the C.G. Jung Helpdesk meetup group. I host live events on Zoom every 2 weeks about the concepts and ideas of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Every event I give a presentation about the Jungian concept, so have fun with this event's topic.
All right. Welcome to a new episode and installment of the C.G. Jung podcast series with a very special topic today, which is about UFOs. And for those who participated in the event, this was already some months ago. And because I structured the event a little bit differently, I did not do a recording. And this haunted me, let's say, which is the reason why I wanted to record it anyways. So this is an episode that was not recorded in front of a live audience, but rather me sitting at my kitchen table and talking about UFOs and, more importantly, about Jung's views about UFOs. So thank you for coming and enjoy. So Jung's views about UFOs were a pretty big surprise to me when I learned about it, because I was not aware of that at all. Like, in a sense, I was not surprised because Jung wrote about really a lot of stuff and also a lot of contemporary stuff. And in the case of UFOs, it's very, very convenient because there's a single book. There's only a single book published where Jung talks about UFOs, and it's called Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And this book was published in 1958, which is 3 years before the death of Jung. And according to his own statements, it took him 10 years of research to write this book. This is likely why it was not mentioned so much in other words, because this was already pretty late in life. He was born in 1875. He died in 1961, so he got 86 years old. So he published this book with 83. And he started working on it, it seems like, with 73. And this is always a point that I find very, very amazing, that Jung really wrote till the end of his life, and he wrote really special and complicated stuff. The alchemical stuff, like Aion and so on. So, and this is one of those books that got published pretty late in life. And I found a quote in another book that was also published around that time. And I want to quote from that just to give you a feeling, really, what the essence is, why Jung is pursuing this, and also what he brought forth in this book, which is roughly 150 pages. I have read most of the relevant literature and have come to the conclusion that the UFO myth represents the projected, that is, concretized symbolism of the individuation process. This spring, I embarked on the subject, and I have just completed it. Today, as a consequence of the general prevailing disorientation, the political division in the world, and the ensuing individual separation of the conscious and the unconscious, the self is generally constellated in archetypal form. This means in the unconscious. Something I had came across repeatedly in my patients. Now, as I know for experience that a constellated, this means activated archetype, may not be the cause, but is certainly a condition of a synchronistic phenomena, I have come to the conclusion that nowadays occurrences might be expected that correspond to the archetype as a sort of mirror image. I then went on to investigate UFOs, reports, rumors, dreams, pictures. This produced a clear result that might be satisfactorily explained by causality if the UFOs were not unfortunately real, simultaneous visual and radar sightings. As yet, there is no reliable evidence that they are actually machines. They could just be easily animals. The sightings seem rather to indicate something of dubious substantiality. So, this is like the summary and the essence of the book. And there's already so much Jung in there. So, in typical Jung fashion, Jung is not really interested about whether UFOs are real or not. So in this book, which is 150 pages, as I mentioned, there's the grand total of 5 pages where he contends with the questions whether UFOs are real or not. But we're talking about Jung here, and Jung is mainly interested in the psychological experience of human beings. So it is completely secondary of whether they're real or not. Mainly important is that human beings started to talk about UFOs and that, let's say, different places over the world and that roughly at the same time. So Jung's question is why? Why now? Why does it look like it looks? And for us, it's again an interesting exercise to get to know Jung better and understand his thought processes and the things that interested him by reading his book about UFOs, which tells us more about Jung than about UFOs. This is why he can say, oh, I investigated UFOs. I analyzed dreams about UFOs. I've analyzed pictures about UFOs and rumors and stuff like that. That is a completely valid source of information for Jung. Again, because human beings develop the urge to talk about this phenomena. And then again, the question, why? Why now? And the reason that Jung saw why in the 20th century this topic suddenly came up, he sees in a multitude of ways. One is, of course, historical. It's the end of World War II. So the old world has most definitely changed. There's a new world emerging. And it is a very scientific, it's a very modern world already for most of the 20th century. And he sees that there's something happening in human beings and that there is this development taking place that we with our consciousness are removed from nature, from the unconscious, the collective unconscious, which causes us to experience weird psychological phenomena that people in the past did not have in that massive scale and this intensity. So he sees the modern world really as a fragmented world, especially after World War II, in an outside way, but also internally. He equates modernity very often with very, very pronounced intellect and consciousness and so on, but then with a very one-sided psychological development, that there's a disbalance within the psyche because we are very strong in our consciousness. We can very consciously do things and achieve things, but we leave out nature and our, let's say, more ancient parts because they're very easy to overlook. The example that he has is that for all of the history of humanity, human beings dreamt about flying. And as soon as they invented machines to fly, the first thing they started to do was to bomb cities. The First World War and the Second World War, and basically every other war since the invention of the airplane. So Jung approaches modernity and the modern psychological condition of human beings with a strong cynicism and a dire warning. The question then always, of course, is why that is, right? Why are human beings now suddenly different than 100, 500, 2,000 years ago? And for Jung, this is not a complete coincidence. For Jung, there's something happening in the lower stratosphere of human psychological development and on a, let's say, species level, so regarding all human beings. And this he called an Aion, time of roughly 2,500 years, where the mental makeup of human beings change and shift. So that, for example, roughly 2,000 years ago, Christianity came up and basically obliterated the Roman Empire. Was not a coincidence. He says there was a psychological shift happening. Of course, human beings were unconscious to that. They acted out. They had suddenly had the need and the desire to do certain things, to express certain things. For him, very much associated in the West with Christianity, with Jesus and the cross and everything that's associated with that. Up to the point that now, at the end of an Aion, these images lose, let's say, their power. They become less important. There's less this need psychologically. There's a new need coming up. But at the same time, there's a confusion about this, right? So it's not that 2,000 years ago, when Christ lived, human beings exactly knew what to do, right? So what followed was hundreds of years of elaboration and investigation and formalization about these thoughts and ideas so that it got expressed in a dogma and pictures and art and rituals, all these different things. And he sees that also happening right now in the 20th century at the end of an Aion. So this is what the book Aion is about. That he says there's a transition and there's new needs, there's new symbols that need to come up, and there's a disconnect because you have the cultural structure, you have the traditions and the images and all these different things, but the ground under them shifted. And from this shifted ground, new stuff will grow, but it will take a very long time. It can take hundreds of years to elaborate what actually is happening right now. So he says human beings are feeling this, and they're expressing this in a fragmented world, right? By a world at war, and with people having more psychological problems, that they experience their psychology. He even calls modern art as neurotic, as one-sided, as incomplete, and not connected so much really to the collective unconscious, where for him creativity comes from, and these rich symbols that enrich people's lives, which is not the staple of modern art, to enrich people's life. This might be interesting, it might be weird, it might be very attention-grabbing, but for Jung, it doesn't really heal the soul. So, and every time when there is trouble and change in the psyche, he noticed in his patients that there was a certain phenomena happening. People started to have visions and dreams, and they would dream of a very specific symbol, especially when people were in a very high stressed situation where everything seemed very chaotic, very disorganized, very dangerous. The psyche would send them a symbol, and that symbol would be one of unity and of order, and this was to inspire hope in the person. And this symbol is the mandala. The mandala is a round circle that has a structured inside, and that is very often very beautiful. So when we now think about that and saying we have the modern world and it's disorganized, and this is why the psyche sends round symbols to people who are disconnected to their psyche, so they do not really experience their psyche, but rather have all their psyche projected to the outside world. For Jung, there's a logical conclusion there. That's what the UFOs are coming from. It is the projected psyche and the projected need to structure and order. So people start seeing round things in the sky because they don't really see them inside. And this is a very much Jungian idea of projecting, that the parts that you're missing in your psyche, you're not experiencing in yourself, of course, but rather you experience them outside in the world. This can also be when you don't want to accept negative qualities that you have, or repressed qualities that you might have, that you start projecting those on other people. And this is associated with shadow. And then this is also very much associated with hate. The things that you cannot get into your psyche or you don't want to accept on yourself, you just put on someone else and say look at them, they're horrible. so that you don't have to deal with yourself. So yeah, he saw that, meaning UFOs, as a collective vision taking place. That would also explain to him why there can be sightings of multiple people, that multiple people have the same vision, the same projection, the same sighting of UFOs at the same time. And this is why he brings us into connection with individuation. As I mentioned in the quote, for Jung, the psyche develops, the personality transforms. Like, this is just what it does. It is like a plant that unfolds, like a flower that unfolds over time. And this is a very, for the psyche, unconscious thing. It's just what it does. It's like the weather. The weather is not conscious of itself. It just does what it does. Similar like plants. And in the same way, our psyche unfolds, or Jung would say our soul unfolds. And this is a red thread that goes through his whole work, this thread of individuation and this thread of unfolding, experiencing, changing, this cycle of confusion and chaos that are then brought into kind of higher unity, and that gets bound together through a symbol. And the ultimate symbol is the mandala, because it represents the self being like the fully integrated being, where all the parts are there where they should be and acting how they should be. This is why the mandala has 4 parts that work in unity. So this is what Jung is saying that people are having when they look in the sky and see their round objects. But he sees also a little bit more in there. And one has to do like, why the sky? Why there? And for Jung, interestingly enough, this has to do with like a psychological need or kind of thing that people notice in their unconscious. And he says, oh, this is because the world is overpopulating. They're getting more and more people, so they kind of try to escape upwards, that there's more space, and to flee from, let's say, a crowded planet, very crowded room. And when I read that, I found that very, very funny, because you have to keep in mind that Jung himself had 5 children. There has been at least 19 grandchildren during his lifetime. So if he was concerned about overpopulation, it's not like that he specifically did something against that. So this is a view from the 50s. Now we know that it's different. Like, overpopulation is not the problem that we're facing. But Jung connects us then. Like, Jung is always connected to the thoughts and ideas of his time, and he's tried to make sense of that. And one of that is this of escaping the earth. So to escape into the outer space where it's just more space. And the second one has to do with religion and the religious instinct. Because Jung says we as human beings, part of our human nature is also to develop and act out religion, or let's say systems that are pretty much religion. So we are captured and in awe of the things that are bigger than us. And he says the experience of the self is one of overwhelming awe. And because religion of the Aion, in its at least form of Christianity, subsiding, creating the need of something new, people start looking upwards and having then something which is very similar to this mythological idea about religion, that you have something, let's say, very mighty in the sky coming down and interacting with us. but being like way more advanced than us, having supreme knowledge that is more than we have. And this reminds me of something that John Peterson mentioned a couple of times, where he states that science fiction is a religion for atheists, and a religion that bears no like moral responsibility for the person experiencing it and reading it and watching it, right? When you watch Star Wars or Star Trek, it's not like that you have to implement certain things in your life. But it's kind of scratching that itch that the religious component has. And another idea from Jung is that in the past, when human beings were differently culturally evolved, let's say, our psyche was also very much projected into the outside world, into nature. So the things that people experienced in nature was very much their own psychology, but then not being aware of it. So these old mythological ideas of, oh, then every forest there's a satyr, and every river there's a nymph, right? Under every bridge there's a troll. He said that this is a clear expression of like the fragmented psyche trying to express itself in the experience of the outside world. Again, like it's about the experience of the outside world. It's not so important whether this is actually happening in the outside world or not. But when people experience it like that, it says something about their psychological state. And he says human beings, through modernity, through rationalism, through science, lost that in a way. Because suddenly everything just became matter. The forest is just a forest, the river is just a river, the bridge is just a bridge. And he says, human beings are still superstitious. They might not be aware of it, but like in the very thin layer of civilization that we have, there's still these thoughts and ideas that want to express themselves. And all that's happened through this materialistic approach is that they are not in the outside anymore. So the normal places where they were before. And he says, then all this, let's say, nymphs, satyrs, trolls, are not outside, but they're rather inside of our own psychology. And whether that's a healthy thing or not is open up to debate. But this is how Jung sees that the religious instinct that was channeled through a symbolic system of, for example, Christianity, tries to find new avenues. We now can say like, oh yeah, there's not a troll under the bridge. But suddenly we say like, oh, there's UFOs and they're visiting us and they're wiser than us and they want to help us develop. And all these religious ideas are then expressed in a mechanical way, in a more scientific way. Like, oh yeah, this is technology. Technology that's so advanced that it seemed magic to us. So it is always that we have the psychological need and it needs to be filled in a certain way. And how it is filled looks different depending on the person. It depends also on the culture, but it's also depending on the time. And he says, this is just how the modern expression looks like. It's one of the UFOs. And this explains, again, why Jung can look into paintings and he can look into dreams and tries to analyze that. Because this is also an expression of this need, same as people seeing it in the sky, people seeing it in their dreams or seeing it in their fantasy that they then put down to paper. It's very similar to that. So this is why you can investigate that. And this is why in a book about UFOs, you only have 5 pages contending with the question whether UFOs are real or not. And the rest is like paintings and dreams. And this is super interesting, and this is a super interesting way of looking at these things. And it is again that Jung finds a way to always go a layer deeper and always add something to that, because it's never only that. Because one of the most interesting ideas that I got in this book was about the paintings. And he says, there's human beings kind of have drawn and expressed weird shapes in the sky throughout a couple of centuries. We have pictures from the Middle Ages where you have like people seeing stuff in the sky. And of course, we now also have today UFO paintings. And the interesting thing that Jung points out when he compared those pictures is that in the pictures of the Middle Ages, you have a person experience the thing. So you always have human beings in the picture, then looking at the thing in the sky. And in modernity, that's not the case. You just have the thing in the sky. So Jung uses this already as a basis to argue that in modernity, we are removed from the bodily. We are removed from the, let's say, perspective. A thing is removed out of, let's say natural habitat. It's always a reduced thing. It's the same as modern art is very often a reduced thing. Like I remember one piece of art, it was 36 glass panels. It was just 36 panels of glass, like stacked on top of each other. Not as a window, right? Not as a table or like anything. It's just like glass. It's removed. And similarly, the picture just shows an UFO without someone experiencing that UFO as you would have it in the Middle Ages. So it is, in a sense, without a body. It's more abstract. It's more removed. And this is then again so interesting to go, that's a very interesting thought. And somehow Jung finds a way to really connect these things. And then I always wonder, is it because Jung says it so, or is he really able to find something then deeper that connects all these different phenomena? For example, how people paint UFOs. But of course, Jung adds more and more stuff to that. And he has some very interesting ideas that, interestingly enough, like pop up later in science fiction. That I found very interesting. Because when I read the book about UFOs from Jung, there came a movie out by Jordan Peele. It was called Nope. It was a UFO movie. But like the super interesting thing in the movie was that the UFO was not a machine, but an animal, similar as Jung wrote in his book from the 50s, where he said, they could just as easily be animals. They're not machines with little green persons in it, or gray persons in it. And also another thing he said was that the weird patterns, how they move, they seem like very erratic tourists. And when I read that, I said, that reminds me of something. Oh yeah, there's this book I very much like. It's called Wayside Picnic from Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, which were two science fiction writers from the Soviet Union. And the book is the basis of the movie Stalker, which is the basis for the video games of Stalker. And there the idea is also that aliens visited the Earth, but it was a little bit like a messy picnic that they just dropped stuff and they did not look for any contact. So they were just on the way. They were like doing something else, leaving these contaminated zones of weird artifacts that behave completely strange and completely like magic, that are in these sealed off zones that people go in to retrieve because they can sell them for money, for example. And this is done by very capable people called stalkers. And it's then again super interesting to see that Jung had a very, very vivid fantasy and like very interesting thoughts, that you have then stuff coming out later, decades later, that ties into that. So this also makes me think, okay, Jung went there into a kind of creative sphere and just dropping stuff like that. And then people make like pretty great pieces of art out of that without being aware of it. Like, I don't think that Arkady and Boris Rogatsky read the book from Jung, or that Joan Paley did. Maybe they did, but more likely it's a creative collective unconscious just pushing certain ideas into the heads and hands and eyes of artists. What he sees also is a kind of compensation. As I mentioned before, we live in a psychologically deprived world. Like, in our world, there's not, in the outside world, mythology. Like, a mountain is just a mountain. A river is just a river. A storm is just a storm. So he says, like, similar also for the religious instinct, like, there's a world without wonder in the sense that people experienced in the past. Like an overwhelming wonder. Like, for example, the church was very concerned to send monks and missionaries and other people into the Alps because of how beautiful the mountains were. Like, there's a very strong reason for nature worship, because nature is very, very impressive. But there's one thing to say like, oh, this looks pretty or interesting. The other thing is to say like, okay, yeah, this is my God now. So, which was something that seemed to happen in the Christian church when the landscape was too beautiful, that people started to become pagans again. So now, but like with a scientific understanding of saying, oh, this is all dead matter, there's wonder missing. And in the psychological model of Jung, stuff cannot really be missing. And if it is, there will be a compensation. That compensation will pop up. And again, it will come in a projected way, because this is where the missing stuff then suddenly starts popping up. And he says, when people have a special psychological development, not development, let's say disposition, personality, they need to experience something completely overwhelming just to bring them back in the center, right? They're completely one-sided and they're missing the other half. So the psyche pushes something to really make them listen and pay attention. So what he sees when people have reports about UFOs and say like, oh yeah, like he's very normal guy, very down to earth, nothing wild and so on. And he saw UFO, so it has to be real because he's a trustworthy person. Jung says, no, you don't get it. Like, because he's so down to earth, because he is so rational, he has to experience a UFO. Like, if you're too, let's say, sensation-minded, you only believe what you see and nothing else. There has to come something which is so strange, so foreign, that you must contend with it. And because you cannot integrate it into your psyche, it will pop up, so that you will find a way how to transform and transfigure yourself to be able to integrate it, to make it make sense. And this again goes back to all these thoughts and ideas of individuation, that we are along on a developmental path that we have not set for ourselves, but that is being set for us on an individual basis or on a collective basis, that makes us have a lot of different experiences and a lot of very weird experiences. And one way how these weird experiences can express themselves is in the form of UFOs, of strange things seen in the sky. And this is why Jung wanted to talk about it. And this is also why I wanted to talk about it, because, again, this is something that not a lot of people know about, and I hope they will know now more about it. And I hope you had fun, and I hope you learned something. And yeah, thank you for paying attention.
This was this event's topic. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about Jung, please check out the description.